Hey there, and welcome back to Culturally Sound. Do I ever have a guest for you this week? Kristina Fahl, the CEO of Shuttlebee. Great solution to a great problem. Let's get into it. Kristina, tell us your story.
So first of all, thanks so much for having me. You never ask a founder to talk about themselves or their startup. They'll exceed the time allotted, but grateful for the opportunity to share a bit. My story starts actually after working for almost 15 years in corporate America. Um, Enjoyed what I was doing and didn't feel like I was open to disruption until it landed on my front porch when I worked about an hour away from where I lived and struggled to get my daughter to school. So I did a little bit of research, found lots of people were sharing this struggle. It was optimistically a $200 billion market. Someone should solve this problem, right? So I did what any normal person would do is I quit my job and I launched a student transportation company. We had a lot of success. We had more work than we knew what to do with, but after 5 years, we shut down because the cost of commercial auto insurance was far outpacing what we could pay and still become profitable. So then, because I like excitement or pain or struggle, whatever you like to call it, I worked on executive teams of venture-backed startups, first as head of operations at bus.com, where I got to operationalize really large projects, but I also got to talk to a lot of large carriers and talk a bit about how they structure insurance for student transportation. So here we are, many years later, launching a company that empowers small transportation providers to deliver big fleet excellence. And we do that by bringing tools, training, and technology that typically small providers don't have access to, bundling that together and then hoping them to deliver on the same level as their larger competitors.
Scratch your own itch. I mean, how many of us have done that, right? This
Yeah.
this this is a much bigger venture than most of us consider an itch. What are some of the challenges that you faced that just seemed unsurmountable, where you were able to? I mean, you are where you are. So what did that look like as a journey, and how did those solutions come to be?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge I faced in the last year has been stepping into arena in which I have little to no experience,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Where transportation and operations has become my backbone and strength. Uh, Touching on regulatory work, I understand that conceptually, but getting into things like insurance and solving that real problem,
Right.
working with 30 and 40-year industry veterans telling me
Mhm.
that this was going to be really, 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 really hard. And then still waking up the next day to keep at it. That's probably big. One of the biggest challenges I've faced.
And how did you like? This is not typically a woman-led industry, right? So what brought like a couple of questions? Um, what gave you the confidence? Where was what instilled that in you? Was that a childhood thing? Was that a recent thing? Was it just anger? What did that look like?
Lots of rage, for sure. So thank you for tapping into that. Lots of frustration and anger.
Hmm.
But no, I wouldn't classify myself as a historically confident person. And I love that you touched on what I like to talk about as imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
Imposter syndrome, I have certainly lived in that world a lot, and
Hmm.
it's a hard story to tell if you're not at the summit. So
Wow.
once you've gotten to the top, it's a really great lesson to share your story of overcoming and pushing through. But
Sure.
when you're
When
walking
you're
up
in
that
it.
mountain, it's a
Yeah.
little harder.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a continuing struggle, and I don't think you can talk enough about it. I don't
Hmm.
have answers, but I'm willing to listen to people who do.
And I think what what inspired that open-mindedness, that humility, that candidness in you that allowed you to be in a position of, I don't have the answers, but I'm willing to find them and I'll source them out and I'll listen. rather than just charging forward?
I feel like I do just charge forward. But I think that someone had, I heard the same lesson a couple of different ways. And I think that lesson boils down to the fact that in life, you take a number of punches, right? If you're learning to fight, if you're learning to box, you start off as a novice. Everyone does, right? No one knows innately how to go win matches. And as you progress, you learn different skills that help your survival, and you get better and better at it. But you can't expect to have, you know, taken those punches before learning a lesson, right? They go hand in hand. So I think just learning to reframe failure as just a stepping stone and just a piece of the puzzle, and trying to normalize it for not just me, but my colleagues, my friends, and just trying to accept that it's without it, it's success can't be really possible if you're working towards something that's really hard.
I always like to sort of consider it's only a failure if you don't continue forward. If
Yeah.
you if you get back up, it's a lesson, it's a learning, it's an opportunity. Um, what types of lessons and opportunities, we talked about some of those insurmountable, or at least we alluded to them. What were some of the early challenges early on? I mean, outside of people just saying, "Oh, this can't be done." Um, do you have any big ones that are sort of in your mind that it's like, whew, that was a tough one. I didn't know if we were going to make it through that.
Oh man, so many. Um, so many. I think this work for me is operationally minded. People, processes, and problems, essentially, working through them. And I tend to take a systematic approach. You put
It's
this
you.
step in front of this step, and you orchestrate these conversations. And to me, it's very logical. But I think one challenge I became aware of with this very tactical, very operational approach is that I missed a lot of the strategy, because I was so busy thinking about putting one foot in front of the other. I often wasn't considering the bigger picture. And I think when it comes to leadership and to training and to developing teams to hit objectives and to build technology, or to, you know, manage safety and risk,
Mm,
um, I think, the most important dynamic there is the people and the humans. And I think really understanding the people and the humans to a more complex level um, has been some of my biggest challenges
mhm.
and some of my greatest growth opportunities, to really try and kind of see the vision of, if we look at step 1 through 10, these are the things that I think tactically can go wrong. But then strategically, who are the players? What are their strengths, and where are their blind spots? And what are my blind spots?
Mm,
How are my blind spots uh, creating risk, right?
right.
So for me, I think I could talk about a number of very specific challenges, but um, theoretically, when I look at like what I learned, it really came down to surrounding myself with people who weren't afraid to tell me about those blind spots and help me to over. Uh,
And I think not being afraid to listen, right, is kind of, it's all well and good to surround yourself with those individuals, but if you're not listening to them, and if you're not executing on the feedback that they're giving, it kind of falls moot, which I think a lot of people have a blind spot around. Great to hear that you didn't. And what,
I'm sure I did. Part of the process of learning, and
fair enough.
by trial and fire, I guess.
So how about successes? What were the big milestones that you accomplished that, create that opportunity to take those next steps forward? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, funny how I spoke anecdotally about the challenges, but I'm willing to rattle off a bunch of wins. What does success look like for me? Becoming officially a venture-backed company was a big
Mm,
deal.
hmm.
I failed to fundraise the first time for many reasons, some beyond my control, some within it. So kind of checking that box was a big success. Um, if I was to point to one success that made my third go round as a founder so much different than my first, it would be that the first one felt like I was pushing a rock uphill,
Hmm.
and now it's like I'm watching watching the rock roll down the hill, trying to keep up with it. And I think it's in large part because of the folks who have joined the team and joined our board and joined it as advisors,
Hmm.
um, and willing to kind of step in and support.
Hmm.
um, and I think, you know, I credit 100% of our success to one, if not many of those connections that have come out of that work. Um, so really it's about not only building a program, but building something that people are excited to contribute to and build with you on. So those are my two favorite successes so far.
Beautiful. When did you believe that you had what it took to be the one at the helm? Like what instilled that in you?
Um, if you'll turn off the recording for just a second, I'm just kidding. Um, probably shouldn't share this approach, but I don't think it's, you know, do I have what it takes? It's, when don't I have what it takes? When will this company grow to an inflection point outside of my skill set? I
Hmm.
can do 0 to 1, I can do 1 to 2. Can I do 2 to 3? Never have. Should I do 2 to 3?
Okay.
Maybe. I think, time will tell if that's the right thing. I think it's a different answer for every founder.
Hmm.
But I think I keep asking myself, if I was to replace myself, what does that person look like? What
Hmm.
skills do I think I don't have? And then how do I acquire them, or how do I go surround myself with people that do have them? So for me, that's not a scary thing. That's an evolution. If I'm promoted, to board, then I've succeeded in at least one way. So
And how do you keep a pulse on that? Like what does that look like for you from a tactical strategic position when when
yeah,
when you're sort of traveling, chasing that rock running down the hill? How do you keep measure on, am I doing a good job?
that's something I probably should spend more time on. Um, yeah, the easy answer for me is the people I'm surrounding myself with. Are
Hmm.
they growing? Am I growing? Is
Good
there,
for you.
like if I look back in the last year, have I grown my skill set? Am I a more competent leader? The people around me, can they see the same?
Mm,
That's like the biggest KPI OKR you can have.
sure.
But tactically, I think if there was a course out there on how do I grow myself as a leader and make sure I'm on track, sign me up.
Got it. And what is that? How does that translate, that ability? Do you have conversations to sort of inspire that in your team? Like, as you, is my team growing? Am I growing? Do those conversations translate into annual reviews, or is that a daily thing? Or, you know, what could that look like for you from a conversational perspective?
I love this question, and I would love to hear your take on it too, given that this is your area of expertise. Like,
Sure, sure.
what do you look for in founders? Where do you think folks go wrong, or how do you amplify support in this way? But the very short answer, very
Hmm.
short.
Hmm.
Um, um, I think there shouldn't be anything in a review, annual or biannual or quarterly, that's a surprise. It's
You got
simply a
it.
documentation of what's going on. I do think it's important to check in. I prefer to write, letters to my future self on what I'll accomplish next year rather than write a review. And
Yeah.
then it's easier to check back in and see how you did versus go backwards. Um, but I think um, I think what I've seen teams do really, really well um, is routine offsite type check-ins, assuming you have like hybrid remote, non-remote teams, and really carving out a very specific agenda and timeline for
Mm.
your time together, and carving out some of that time for not just team building but growth building and uh, you know addressing those really hard questions. Um,
Intentionality, really, right?
yeah,
And holding space for that. I think for me, and in answer to your flip question there, I think I like turning reviews on their head a little bit. So I use reviews as an opportunity to talk about where the team member is going, how they plan on getting there, their role within the company, their vision for where they want to be headed and how they're going to get there, and how the company facilitates that growth. And then having quarterly reviews to make sure that they're on that path, having monthly check-ins to make sure that any corrections that are needed are sort of answered, and the review process is actually weekly or daily, where you're having casual moments, impromptu moments of you did this well, this was that hamburger, right? The compliment construction and praise around what that should look like. So absolutely agree with you. The review should never be anything of any surprise, because you've touched on it consistently throughout the year. And then that annual review is an opportunity for them to speak into you and talk about you as their leader. And I feel like the goal of a leader and not a boss is to mentor, develop, and teach, rather than just manage and construct. So does any of that resonate with you, or do you see parallels in how you're managing your team in that?
yeah, no, I love it, and I think a question that I had for you now is, and I appreciate you answering my questions
For
on
sure. Yeah, of
on
course.
how, I think folks come to the table with varying degrees of
Yeah,
coachability, right?
sure. For sure.
So how do you coach coachability?
So it's a bit of a glass ceiling, right? When you're having conversations with them and if they're not open to criticism, if they're not open and asking for that feedback, then that's the first point of growth. Because if the whole adage of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink, like, that is a closed mindset, right? And if you're not willing to be introduced to something new, and you can take it in trepidatiously, or you can cannonball into the pond, whatever you want to do. But um, you have to be open to receiving that knowledge, that information, and looking at creative ways to incorporate that into how you work or how you could work, and push back on what you don't like and look for clarity of what is meant by what's being shared. Communication is a bit of a tricky thing, in as much as the leader, I believe that it's your responsibility to share your concepts, your ideas, your thoughts, your directions clearly. And if who you're speaking with isn't able to share back the ideas with the intent of how you shared it with them, then you're poorly communicating the concept or idea. So taking the opportunity to be curious about what they're hearing and ensuring that it has the intent of what you're sharing, and then correcting any misconception or misunderstanding is crucial, particularly of leaders, because it's your responsibility for those that follow you and their success. And if they're consistently unsuccessful, you sort of have to reflect on that. And if they're more successful than you expected, then that's a clear indication that you're doing an incredible job as their leader, and allowing them to shine. Because our goal as leaders is to produce the next leader, and that succession as you sort of travel on down that path. Now, that's an incredibly abstract concept, but how does that feel to you?
No, I think it's spot on. I think where I've seen high potential coachability challenges when you've got high performing, more fixed mindset
Mhm,
learners.
mhm,
And it's such an interesting, because it's such an interesting path, right?
mhm.
Um, so I guess my next question would be, so there are some roles that fixed mindset is might be a better fit for.
Yes.
So how do you take the exceptionalness of someone in the right job for their skill set and their temperament and their role, but potentially having that blocker as a feedback loop, right? So, um, where they may have more of a fixed mindset and maybe less open to coaching. Like, have you encountered any, that situation? If so, how did you overcome that?
Yeah. So that's sort of a conversation around their path, their goals, their aspirations, and guiding that path appropriately for their skill sets. If they're willing to learn and be open and expand, then there's room for and that's the reference that I made to a glass ceiling, right? Is that openness is typically that ceiling, and they can travel along that ceiling and be incredibly successful, and however you want to measure success, be that monetarily, be that in accolades, be that personally, however that gets measured, that's a completely different conversation. But allowing them the ability to travel on down that glass ceiling, and
Right.
as long as they're a contributor to the overall goals of the team, and it's not an individualistic role, great. The moment that comes in conflict, well, then that's a conversation. And it's that old adage of sometimes you got to hire, or you've got to share that difficult personality with the competition, and graciously so,
Yeah.
because it's just not a good fit. And maybe they were a great contributor for the stage, that level 1 or that level 2 that you were at, but the people that are around you today, as you grow into that level 3 leader, may not be the same people that you surround yourself with then. And it's from the lessons that you learn and you're open to bringing in that allow you to make those adjustments and changes. And none of them have to be traumatic. They can be very gracious, and you can maintain that relationship, but it's just not a good fit for today. And perhaps they can go off and learn the lessons that they need elsewhere, and then come back and be a participatory contributor to the goals of where you're at, down the road. It doesn't, none of it has to be terminal. It can all sort of work. But that's all through conversation and discussion and awareness and all those good things.
Yeah, and you asked the question earlier, like, how do you measure your own success and your own growth? I think, some of the most exceptional leaders I've seen do what you just explained beautifully, right?
Mm.
Um, so yeah, lots
So
of good stuff.
from there, I mean, how have you reshaped your leadership and your management from previous versions of yourself to how you're dealing with it today?
Hmm. Well, I think going back to building, it's a lot of flatline organizations. I might speak to some leadership, at a company with $900 billion under assets, at 1 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock, I'm talking to a small agency of three, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think I'm back to, versatility, and communication, and really trying to be consistent, but cognizant of the different experiences that the folks I'm working with. Uh, but yeah, wildly different than, running teams in corporate, to running teams at different levels of startups. Um, so I think people tend to settle into what their favorite is. Um, I think my favorite might be, 0 to 2, if I had to
Right.
guess.
Yeah.
But I think you have to kind of get experience outside of that to know what that is.
And is there anything that is there a lesson that's continued to pop up where you're like, "Ah, I thought I learned this lesson last time, and here I am muddling through these challenges again." Is that something that you've experienced, or have you been good about sort of crossing those T's, dotting those I's, and leaving them on the shelf?
There's always a lesson, right? That you have to relearn until you learn it. It keeps punishing you until you do. And I think for me, I see the talent in people. Often when they don't see it themselves.
Mm,
And my greatest fun in work is just seeing someone just plow through the barriers they had set
yeah,
up for themselves. But
yeah.
on the flip side, I don't always I see the talent of what they could be, not always precise about where they are, right?
Mm,
And sometimes have made some bad calls from a leadership perspective on, too much room, not enough room, too much
mhm,
length, not enough length. So, because I bank in optimism, sometimes that fails. So, for me personally, I've tried to meet people where they're at instead
mm,
of crossing that middle ground and going too far. And I've spoken to a lot of leaders who've had to learn that lesson, and no doubt I'll have to learn it again at the next round. But I feel like
yeah.
each time I get a little bit better at it. So
I don't think you're alone in that one. I think, um, you know, I can definitely, I often believe more in people than they do themselves. And that's something that I need to, work at measuring a little bit more and being okay with. If
yeah,
they don't want to live up to their potential, I can't force it. And
right.
and I'll be here when they're ready to take a step through that door, and I will hold that door open as long as I possibly can for them. But sometimes you just have to let go and continue down that path with the people that are willing to participate and get involved and grab a mitt and get in the game.
Yeah.
The the concept of community, you pointed to that a little bit ago around the people that are following you and are with you. The power of community, and I feel like we were never more aware of it than 5 years ago when we lost so much of that community. What does that look like today for you versus your previous experiences with it, when you're the one that's able to build it with the people that are sort of following along with you? How does that feel? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, now that I'm so grateful to have these, you know, folks to, help inform our journey.
Mm,
Um, I would never have done it any other way if I knew that this was the way before. I think having grown up in corporate, networking was not something I did,
mm,
or
yeah.
actively thought about, or it was very intimidating. And, they would have, uh, again, it was a barrier of my own construction, right? There were opportunities, there are, but I didn't seek them out because it wasn't critical to my role there. So I think that was the first step, is just breaking out of it and sort
Mhm,
of forcing myself into more community activities. But it didn't. It took a while. It took a while for me to really understand that people want to share their value. They want to help, and they're in a position to help it because they've you know earned it, and have lots to share, and do enjoy people avoiding the mistakes and pitfalls they've made. That brings them joy. So, that where I used to look at it as someone giving me a hand up is a weakness.
mhm.
Now I look at it as not only a strength, but a really wonderful privilege to be in that spot. So
It's and that's it, I can't believe the frequency of the conversations that I have around asking for help and the stigma that asking for help is a weakness. It,
yeah,
it takes an incredible amount of strength to identify a position that you're not confident in and ask for that help. And often leaders who don't ask for help are seen as siloed and uncommunicative and unemotionally available. in their role, because they always have the answers and they don't need any help. So why am I even a part of this team? And that's a tough lesson learned. If you were to describe yourself in 3 words, what do you think you would choose?
This is the kind of question I'd like in my back pocket too. Next time. Um, I like to think of myself as someone with integrity, um, someone who's looking to be a champion and be around champions
Mm-hmm,
and win. So
mm-hmm,
win, yes, champion. And um, someone who values quality, like really um, knows the value of people and work of substance.
mm-hmm. I
And
can
if I get you over, I'd like it to, no, just kidding.
no,
That's a
I
tough
can
one.
see that, right? Like, and it is tough, right? Especially when you're on the spot. Do you have a guiding quote that, or a mantra that sort of keeps you focused and narrow on the path that you're charging up that mountain?
I mean, for me personally, no, that's great advice. I should do that. For the company, we've thought a lot about, what is Shuttlebee's mission. And it really boils down to opening the door for parents to, you know, be ethically and enjoyably employed, removing barriers to, um, that prevent that from happening
Hmm.
for people who want that. And
Hmm.
it's not the path everyone wants to travel. But if you do, you know, I would like to play Shuttlebee to play a role in is removing that as a barrier. And then it expanded a bit. I'm like, well, we're also offering opportunities for people who want, to grow in entrepreneurship. So really it came down to efficacy, like, people to be able to have efficacy outside of logistics,
Hmm.
um, and barriers from their family.
Hmm.
That was probably about 30 sentences in that one, but
It's okay. That's okay. It's just sort of allowing space for that to shape itself, and
yeah,
that's all good. Do
for
you have a
sure.
morning routine, or do you have anything that, gets you out of bed in the morning? Do you have a journaling routine at end of day? What does that mean, or what does
Yeah.
that look like for you?
Yeah, I don't think people talk about this enough. In the last 2 years,
Okay.
I've tried to become very disciplined
Mm,
in my routine. I have like my A routine and my B routine. The B
okay.
routine is what actually happens. The A routine is what ideally I'd like to happen.
The
Uh,
aspirational routine for A.
the aspirational routine and the one that I get to maybe around like, I don't know, January, February is, waking up at 5 and taking that full hour of reflection, uh, before starting the day.
Mm,
But plan B is waking up at 6,
yeah.
taking 20 minutes of reflection,
Nice.
and then starting the day. But having incorporated that into my routine has actually tangibly improved my life.
Hmm.
And I think doing that again at the end of the day too, to reflect differently, where I think um, in the morning I'll spend time sort of creating space for opportunity. And at the end of the day, it's more about reflecting on what went well, what do I want more of, thinking very little about what I want less of, just trying to put that aside, because, work is hard, life is hard, and it's easy to ruminate,
Yes.
so spending that time eliminating the rumination and just
Hmm.
focusing on where to go next and not where you were that you didn't love.
Hmm. That's a tricky one, right? Because I mean, that informs the ability to sharpen where you want to go. And I think, um, you know, absolutely dwelling on those rocks, and leaving them at your feet is important, and not continuing to carry them with you. But I think, having clarity around what got you into that position and being able to avoid that the next time is critical. What what is the thing that you're most afraid of? and why? And you can be as vulnerable as you wish. Business, personal, completely up to you.
Yeah. When I used to get this question, it was very easy, right?
Mhm.
The first few years of running a student transportation company, I did not sleep for 2 years, not
Oh
like
boy.
zero sleep, right? It's a lot of personal responsibility. Are we doing everything we can?
Right.
And then I came across a book who I'll share for your notes,
Please.
um, where it studied the sport of football and it's very deeply intricate sport with a lot of rules, and the ability to prepare for 100% of things that you can predict, right? There's always, let's say, 20% of things you can't predict, right? And you have to just be okay with the fact that despite the best preparation, it's still possible, right? Something unforeseen can get in the way. But really, put very simply, it's about maximizing preparedness. So once I felt very confident that we were doing everything we possibly could do within our power to functionally deliver operational excellence in student transportation, I could then sleep. So I'm not saying there aren't or won't be things that cause me to stay up at night again.
Yes.
As your company grows, you're making payroll, people's jobs and careers are on the line.
Mhm.
We're still dealing with liability of passenger transportation.
Yes.
Um, but for me, easing the the anxiety through preparation has helped. So for me right now, we're in the stages of launching different phases of insurance operations.
Hmm.
So always the thing that worries me is the next step in that process. So right now I'm facing a very critical, a very time-consuming next step. I look forward to being on the other end of that, but that's what's taking most of my focus right
And then moving on to the next adventure. Yeah,
now.
for sure. And I
Yeah.
completely, yeah, I can completely, in a previous life when I was responsible for, 25, 30 people that worked for me, their livelihoods were my responsibility. And living up to that, was definitely a fear and if you dwell on that, that can consume you. You've got to be able to, create paths forward. Or at least I said it earlier, measuring of success. What does success look like to you?
Mm. Well, I'm forgetting the many quadrants of, there's personal, professional, career,
Sure.
health, wellness,
Faith.
happiness,
Yeah, for sure.
I think exactly. So, I think at the top of the list is, you know, finding joy in the day,
Good for you.
secondarily, financial security is obviously fun.
Sure.
Um, and just spending time with, you know, folks that challenge you, in a way that, is warmly received and not pushing you over the edge. Um, so that's a loosely defined success metric. If you ask me about the careers, I'd give you our 3-month goals and our 2-year goal, our exit strategy,
Sure.
if we have one, which we don't.
Of course, of course.
Um, but I think at the end of the day, it's you know focusing more on the day to day and less on the 10-year plan has been where I've tried to grow and live, given them such a planner.
I love that joy was one of the first things out of your mouth. It's so easy to focus on everything else and lose track of, you know, what actually makes you happy and brings you to a place that fills your cup. I think we all need to look for that joy a little bit more and measure our success against the frequency of it and then make adjustments accordingly. So that's a beautiful thing. When when you think of your superhero, is that a Marvel, DC, Superman, Batman type of figure, or is that more of a mentor model, uh, real life person that you aspire to sort of emulate, or nothing at
Yeah,
all?
yeah, no, yeah. You go through the evolution as an adult, right? It changes. I
Sure.
think for me, I've just had such benefit from mentors, coaches giving me their time and their experience. So, when folks do that with no expectation,
Mm,
I used to wonder why, how? How are you carving out this time? What's in it for you? What's your motivation? But people who do it because it makes them happy, to me, that's a superhero. I think somebody very early on in my career, was giving me the secret sauce to launching a short-term rental.
yeah.
I'm like, why are you telling me all this? I could just go compete against you and take your, he goes, life's too big for that. I figured it out. Makes me happy to tell it to you. And if you
Mhm,
can shortcut your process, great.
mhm,
And I think that kind of clicked for me that, knowledge and wisdom isn't this thing to be captured. It's, something to be shared. And for people who are at the point where they have that to share and they
mhm.
do it, that to me is a superhero.
I think the ability to have the space to offer that, I think
Right.
is such a gift. Are you fortunate enough to be able to pass that along with
No.
anyone?
Nope. I'm in struggle forest, trough of sorrow land where
Right.
things are happening,
We've got
but
them named. Yeah.
but yeah, I aspire to be there one day for
Good
sure.
for you. Listen, it has been a gift. Thank you so much for the conversation, your time. I could talk to you for another hour. It would be
Same.
an
We should
absolute
do it
pleasure.
sometime then.
I think
This is
so. I
great.
think so. Kristina, thank you so much. I wish you all the success, and look forward to chatting again.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to seeing you again. Bye now.
Perfect.